I wanna say right off the bat that Owlboy is probably the closest thing we have to a gaming equivalent of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. The story, however, is more Disney than Miyazaki, which in context of 16-bit inspired aesthetic makes me feel that Owlboy is probably what you would get if you were to devoid the narrative of Final Fantasy VI of its maturity and depth, while keeping the accessibility, likable characters and the well-written dialogue. It is a light-hearted, child-friendly story with not so much thought-provoking themes as moral lessons to be learned at a young age. Lessons about teamwork, honesty and the consequence of lying. Kid stuff, basically. However, you should not let the simplicity of the narrative blind you to its strengths. The reason I've made the comparison to the Sakaguchi's storytelling was because Owlboy has the same degree of craftsmanship. Not a single line of dialogue feels harsh or out of place, not a single character arc feels unnatural, and the story itself feels almost perfectly paced. This is a simple story done right. You've heard this tale a million times, however, because of how well told it is, it manages to do one of the most valuable things a story could. It makes you care for its characters. You get charmed by the innocence of their personalities and want them to inevitably prevail over the equally innocent struggles that they face. The fact that it makes you do that without any depth or substance with just the basic tools of video game storytelling proves how well made the story is. With even a slight mistake, a story this basic would break. It would not evoke charm in its narrative, nor likability in its characters. Funnily enough, these characters are not important simply because of story reasons, but also gameplay-wise. You see, the main gimmick of Owlboy is that the new abilities you unlock, which would, in a standard Zelda-like fashion, allow you to access places you couldn't previously, are actually those characters. In all fairness, it's not something that changes the gameplay all that much, but this detail serves an almost symbolic role. The characters are elements of the story, yet the mechanics that they open up for you are purely gameplay related. So in a weird way, characters tie together the story and gameplay, and I know it sounds far-fetched, but believe me, I'm going somewhere with this. The gameplay is not great. It's fine, don't get me wrong, but if the gameplay was all this game was going for, then it would certainly not make the list. In fact, the gameplay is exactly the same as the story. It is well executed, yet lacking in depth. But you see, in just the same manner as gameplay and story were literally tied together in form of characters, the game as a whole becomes more than the sum of its parts. I mean, the gameplay lacks a certain sense of accomplishment and progression you would expect from this genre, yet you don't feel like you aren't progressing, because the story fulfills this role. Instead of being motivated by acquiring new heart containers and items with which you can acquire even more heart containers, you get a great sense of actual reason for why you're doing what you're doing. In a very classical sense, story provides context for your actions, thus creating a sense of accomplishment through character-driven narrative. And the lack of depth within this narrative is made up with world building. This world building aspect is actually why I called Owlboy the game equivalent of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. The atmosphere and setting are probably Owlboy's most powerful assets, as it knows how to perfectly balance the light-hearted feeling of a big, beautiful world in which you can fly around wherever you want, and the foreboding sense of mystery surrounding the ancient history of this world. It knows the value of build-up and intrigue. It knows when to be dark and moody, as to not ruin the light-hearted presence of the game, but to complement it, so that when everything is cheerful, you would feel cheerful, when it's mysterious, you would feel intrigue, and when it's dark, you would feel like something's wrong. This is a classic way to design a game experience, which is just as common as a story about friendship and honesty. However, I don't see it being executed within this genre all that often, as action-adventures seem to always commit themselves to pure gameplay with minimal story. But that is a structure that has proven itself through quite literally decades of engaging titles, and Owlboy's attempt at mixing it with the action-adventure genre proved to be a wonderful gaming experience that is more than the sum of its parts.